Good evening. So this is for the civil rights discussion, and we're going to start with the MLK letter from the Birmingham jail. And my humble reaction to this letter was, learning about MLK growing up was kind of viewed as a passive, with the nonviolent protests and stuff like that to send messages and further the civil rights movement for African Americans. This letter was very blunt and I would say confrontational. And I would say also he didn't sugarcoat anything in this letter. Just looking at a direct quote I have here, it said, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. And the word tension is the best way I could use to describe this. You listen to King's words and you just feel this tension of unease just reading what he says. So, one paragraph that really stood out to me, and just you could feel the tension in this paragraph. He says, perhaps it is easy for those who have felt the stinging. Let me rephrase that. Sorry. Perhaps it is easy for those who have not felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. When he says wait, the people say for the African Americans to be patient and wait for their rights to become more seen in America. But it's been so long that he's getting tired of waiting. It says, but when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of 20 million Negro brothers smothering an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you have suddenly found your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you try to explain to your 6-year-old why she can't go to the public amusement park that was just advertised on the television, and see tears welling up in her eyes. When she is told that Funtown is closed to color people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who's asking, Daddy, why do white people treat color people so mean? When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs that read white and colored. When your first name becomes hard R, and your middle name becomes Boy, and your last name becomes John. And as a grown man, just myself, just another person, especially a man, calling you boy, that is a very huge sign of disrespect. And I've seen plenty of racist scenes in movies and stuff growing up where they call the African American or the colored person boy, and it honestly, as a grown man, it makes my blood boil, because we're grown men. We're not boys anymore. So you can feel the tension in these examples that he's pointing out, and through the tension, you can just feel that there's nothing you can do, because like he said from the beginning, perhaps it's easy for those who have not felt the stinging dart of segregation to say wait and wait your turn, because there's nothing that we can do about it, because we have no power. And you can just feel the tension of just hate for the situation, what it is, and that King has had enough. So anyways, moving on to the second part of the forum here, when it comes to the hardships that the African Americans faced as far as being equal to the law. When black people became citizens under the Constitution, tying back to King's point of they thought that this was the last straw, that this was it. But even though they had been formally accepted as citizens under the law, socially they still were not accepted, because then the white people countered by making Jim Crow laws, which segregated the schools. And the white people just kind of knew what they were doing, knowing that, well, if we segregate schools, we know that financially that the black people are in the lower class, so therefore the schools are underfunded and they don't have materials enough. They're setting back the next generation of black Americans to try to counteract the fact that they are now citizens. You know, and it was okay because segregation at the time for the Supreme Court, it was deemed separate but equal. But like I said, with the materials not being dated, with the lack of funds for the school, you know, it really wasn't equal. It was separate, but it was not equal. So then, even whenever Brown v. Board was passed on the Supreme Court to eliminate segregation from the public schools, you know, it says right here from the Crash Course video, it says, even when it was passed, white protesters terrorized the black communities throughout the South with riots and violence. So even in a black American's perspective, they became citizens, and then white Americans made laws to undercut their next generation and still make them socially not as equal. Well, even when the Brown versus Board got passed to eliminate segregations from the schools, well, then the whites said, okay, well, now we're just going to terrorize you and riot you and make you socially uncomfortable as much as we can to still make you feel not as equal. And keep in mind, all of this is happening after all these years of slavery, after your race had just got freed from slavery. I mean, you can just kind of see why King is filled up with hatred. They say, wait, just wait. You know, keep passing laws and eventually you're going to be equal. And he's, not just him, but the whole race is sitting there thinking, well, we were enslaved by this group of people at the time, I mean, in 1860. So, I mean, we've been waiting a long time. So it's just, there's so much tension, and rightfully so. So, I mean, and the best way I described it was, if these are my own words, it said, it feels like on this road to equality for African Americans, there's a van full of white supremacists following them very closely, following their every turn. And that's the best way I could describe it. But anyways, thank you all for your time, for listening to this, and have a great evening. Thanks.